And we're live. Cool. All right, everybody. Welcome to DevRunner. My name is Paul. I am a 52-year-old endurance runner. I am an RRCA certified running coach, and this is Coach's Corner. Today, I am absolutely thrilled to have a very special guest on the live stream, Mr. Steve Carmichael. He is the founder of the RunBuzz podcast. He is also the man behind Run for Performance training. He was an absolutely instrumental person in me becoming a more serious runner and pursuing my certification as a run coach. What else can I say about this incredible man? Just by sheer coincidence, I got to share this, Steve. We share the exact same birthday, so I kind of feel like we're virtual twins.
Wait,
you know,
May 31st?
May 31st, 1969.
Tell me that before, and we're old. We get things now, but
yeah, no, it was one of those things.
1969.
Yeah, same day.
I did not know that. Well, happy birthday in advance.
Yeah, thank you. Same to you.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, I mean, it's very cool. And the fact that we're both so into running, it's amazing. Very, very parallel paths in life here. So, with that said, we'll get more into everything you've been up to. But that's kind of like my short intro for you. I can't say enough about Steve as a coach. Beyond his encouragement of my career in running, RunBuzz has just encouraged, inspired, motivated so many people over the years. It's an absolute thrill to have you here today, Steve. Before we get into the subject matter at hand, which is building speed, I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about what you've been up to lately and where people can find you. Just talk about all the different social media outlets that you have.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the last part first. I run a website called RunBuzz.com, and the origin of the site was really just to be a site to post show notes for a podcast that I thought would just be a nice little hobby to do on the side. And I was coaching at the time, but it's like it just grew. I was starting podcasts when there might have been maybe 9, 10 running podcasts. Now I think everybody has one, so it's a little more competitive now. But I run I've been coaching about 11 years, give or take a couple months, and I started off just with coaching running clubs here in town, and then it kind of grew online, and then that was where Genesis behind RunBuzz. I was also doing local middle school, high school, and local kind of private coaching at the time. And then I stepped away with it when RunBuzz became more of my focus. And a couple years ago, I started to get back into it, and COVID hit and everything shut down. And all of a sudden I wasn't coaching high school kids because they weren't having seasons, and same with middle school. And so I'm doing private coaching. I'm not coaching their teams, but I coach off season. And so it turned into more of when COVID started to open things back up and kids got back in school. That's really been where my focus has been the last year, was really around sports performance, conditioning, speed. I coach everything from sprinters to milers, but I still coach adults, and I am coaching quite a bit. I do enjoy it. But yeah, that's been what my last year. I do have a couple social media accounts. I have a private Facebook community, RunBuzz. It's a private community where you can come in and talk about running with other runners and not have to worry about annoying our friends that aren't runners. And you can find me on Instagram at RunBuzz as well. Those are the two primary places, but home base is runbuzz.com.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. And I will put that in the show notes as soon as this live stream is over. And let's see. Let me just say again, I'm so thankful that you're here, because your experience, not just with online coaching, not with just in-person coaching, but with the full breadth of speed, like from young kids who can just fly to more serious runners who are continuing to pursue a lifelong career as runners, to those people who are just getting started. Speed means different things. So I'm hoping tonight that we can talk about the best ways to build speed, whether you are a new runner, a more experienced runner who's going for some kind of incredible PR, and whether you're going for, a race PR that's as short as a 5K race, all the way up to marathon or ultra marathon if you want to go there. And so I think just to get us started, and while we're waiting for chat comments to come in, let's start like kind of like with the lowest hanging fruit. Let's talk about the healthiest and best ways maybe to build your speed as a newer runner who's trying to build towards their first 5K race.
Yeah, I think the thing I want to just preference all this with is that we have to keep in mind that everybody's different, and we're all coming in at different experience levels, right? So because of that, we're going to try to boil it down to some generic stuff, but I'll try to give tips along each thing. I'll start off for the beginner runner. So I'm classified beginner runner as somebody who's been running under a year, someone who is pretty new to running, or they've been away from running for a while and they're getting back into it. And the most important thing that I think a new runner should focus on is not speed. It's consistency.
Thank you.
And it is also working on building a reasonable level of training volume. Now, when I say training volume, I don't mean go out and run 80 miles, 100 miles a week, like we sometimes see elite runners do. Training volume for a new runner might be working yourself up to run 10, 12, 15 miles per week, and getting to a point where you're starting to build a good running base, because no speed workouts are going to benefit you until you have good cardiovascular development. Any distance above 400 meters, the aerobic energy system are what we call cardio, and that is the primary energy system. And to get faster, you're training energy systems. Okay? So the idea is as newer runners and even experienced runners, until you have consistency and until you have built a decent training volume or a decent base, the speed work's going to be a very small piece, right? So we want to build great aerobic capacity, great cardiovascular. That's what's delivering oxygen, and oxygen is the most important thing to make us get faster. So that is the first part I would say. Start with beginners is put masking tape over your watch, go out and run, slow, run easy for the bulk of your runs. Now, after you've been running minimum of 6 months, but maybe a year, then if you want to start working in some little more maybe upper aerobic runs, like maybe tempo runs, upper, where we're starting to get into lactate threshold. And I apologize for the term. That's just the geekiness in me. But as we start getting into that upper levels of stuff, you can start introducing a little bit of that. Until you really get to a point where you're starting to run 20, 30 miles a week, you're probably going to be better served by building that consistency and that aerobic capacity than you are any particular going out and running laps around a track at high speeds.
I completely agree. I completely agree with everything you just said, sir. I just want to give a quick shout out to Curtis Commerce. Thank you for being here tonight. Yeah, stay tuned, Curtis. This is only the tip of the iceberg. Steve is just so full of great information. Yeah, Steve, I just want to not only agree with you, but yeah, when you're a new runner, just getting those easy miles under your belt for those first 6 months or so is so important, because not only are you building your cardiovascular capabilities, but those easy runs are doing the most efficient job of things like building mitochondria in your muscle cells so that you can process oxygen more efficiently, which in the long run allows you to run faster, harder, and so if it's a gradual ramping up, start with nothing but easy mileage, like Steve said, everybody.
It's not that it's easy those first 6 months. It's just the intensity. You want to try to keep it as low as possible.
Exactly. Yeah. Good.
Because I would tell you, when I started running there was nothing easy about the first 6 months.
Yeah, exactly. And, as a side note, I want to encourage everybody who is a new runner. Yeah, that first couple of months, there's a lot of, I wouldn't call it pain, but extreme discomfort involved with becoming a runner, possibly. But keep it slow, and the progress, you will be amazed at what you can do after 3 or 4 months. But just you're allowing your bones, your muscles, your tendons, your ligaments all to adjust to the load that you're putting on them for the first time in your life. So patience, consistency, that's where you want to start. So Steve, somebody's been running for a year and they feel like they've kind of plateaued. Where do you want to take them next? You said a little bit, you want to start pushing them to something that you called a lactate threshold. Please elaborate.
Yeah, so let me back up that. There are some foundational pieces that make up what we would call endurance performance. So when I say endurance performance, being able to run at a faster pace for, that's typically what we think of as race pace, and being able to increase our speed. And there's three areas that we want to focus in for developers. And one is Vo2 Max. And that's basically the maximum amount of oxygen, right, that we can uptake. Remembering that oxygen helps us release energy. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is running economy, and I'll explain that here in a second. But running economy is an important piece, because we always hear about Vo2 Max is everything. Vo2 Max is everything. Vo2 Max is just one of many, many, many things that impact our performance. So I get a little irritated sometimes with my watch, and my watch is always telling me about, it's trying to say Vo2 Max this and Vo2 Max this, and I'm like, there's more to it than that. Running economy is important, and we'll describe that. And then the thing I was kind of really talking about was being able to prove something called our fractional oxygen utilization. That's just a big fancy word that, as you get closer to what you would say is your max effort, we have to get to a point where we can be more efficient with the oxygen. And that's where some of the Vo2 Max comes in. We do need to be able to increase it, or help to increase it, so that we're getting more oxygen onto our muscles where they need it to convert to energy. But in order to get that, when we start getting into those upper thresholds runs, what we're happening here is we're as our endurance and fitness level gets better,
Mm-hmm.
our upper level of that oxygen, that greater percent of, we can get close to max effort, and then we get better fitness, and then max effort raises, right?
Exactly.
The challenge we have with runners a lot of times is that they only focus on one area. They focus on wanting to do a lot of speed work. Well, the problem is, if you don't develop your oxygen utilization, whether that's a lot of training down at the what I would call zone 1, zone 2, the easy runs, the
Mm-hmm.
things that are going to improve that cardiovascular system. If we're not improving that, we're always going to be bumping up. We're never going to be able to raise that ceiling that's keeping us from getting faster. And so that's why you see a lot of runners who focus on increasing their miles, right? The volume, where if you're someone who's running 20 miles a week, and you're not improving your speed, you might not be out running enough that you could benefit if you maybe bump that up to 30 and 40 and 50 and 60. Now, eventually there's a period of time where kind of, you can only carry that so long.
But I found that out the hard way.
If you build your aerobic capacity, which takes sometimes months, years to build, you will get there, but it takes, some people can do it faster than others, obviously, because of genetics and a number of different things. But that's what I meant by the idea that you want to get near, like, in order to sustain a pace, you still have to have oxygen. You still got to utilize that oxygen. That's what's converting the energy. And you have to get as close as you can to that max percent. If you really want to be fast, you got to get as close as you can to that point, so you can sustain that speed over time. If you go too high, you can't sustain it. Then you go anaerobic, and then that starts to shut us down. Otherwise, we would
exactly
marathon, right?
Exactly. Now, before you go on, Steve, I just want to interrupt here for a quick second, because I think this is a great place to just give a quick answer to Curtis's question here. Can biking help supplement running when running isn't possible? Absolutely. And I think for all the reasons that Steve just covered, because when you're doing your mileage or your base building, you're trying to build your aerobic capacity, and cross training is a wonderful way to do that. I know a lot of runners, a lot of very accomplished, fast runners who do a ton of cross training, who do a lot of stationary biking, and it has just immense effects on their ability to move fast. So as a short answer,
it's a great way for you to get more volume without having the wear and tear and the breakdown of if you were going to go out and run extra miles. In fact, I would argue that it's probably, you do want to set aside a certain percent and use those cross training techniques, whether it's swimming, biking, or whatever, to just take the wear and tear of your body off, because as you increase volume, you increase wear and tear on you. So definitely stationary biking is an excellent excellent cross training exercise, low impact.
Cool. Now, Steve, while we're on the subject of cross training, I want to expand that out a little bit, because I think this is going to apply to everybody at every skill level that we're going to be talking about for the rest of the evening. Just talking about core strength and even strength training, how important do you think that is in general? And where along the lines of your running experience in your running career do you think those become the most important? At what point would you not continue as a runner, or recommend that a runner continue upping their mileage and upping their speed without core strength and strength training? Like, how does that play in for you?
That's a question. They could go in a lot of ways. First of all, strength training is I found has been absolutely critical. I now make it mandatory for every middle school and high school athlete I treat. They do strength training. They don't come to me without doing strength training. It's the same with any of the individual people I coach. There's a couple of reasons for it. So there is core strength, and core helps us with posture. Core will prevent us from, like, when we're running, if you ever see somebody, I see one thing that's real common, somebody's running, you see a lot of the arm cross. It's almost like they're dancing, right?
Yep.
All right. So if runners have strong cores, they will tend to stay more upright. They will tend to stay more balanced. And most running injuries come from imbalances. So you have one muscle that might be overactive in the sense that it's contracting too much. And then so there's this concept of overactive, underactive muscles. But the idea is it creates this muscular imbalance. And this is why a lot of times runners who have knee problems, they have issues in the hips, because they're overactive and they're pulling on the muscles that guide the tracking of the knee. There's also, so core strength is very important. And I think it's kind of the foundation for any kind of strength training, whether it's running or not. The second thing is that there's also reactive strength that we don't always hear about. And reactive strength is that ability for, if we think about it, how fast you can push off when you're running, right? It's more about the more you have what we call reactive strength, the more and easier you can push off and generate force as you're striding. And that reactive force is, if you have strength there, and if you are, building that reactive strength, you're actually cutting down the impact and the shock on your system of just the pounding of the ground.
Yeah.
Right? And so that does tie into the running economy, which again, we can talk again, but core strength and strength training is important. And it does not have to be the heavy weights and barbell curls, that's more bodybuilding. I'm talking about light dumbbell or body weight. There's also some benefits with high intensity training. If you can mix some of that, there is some benefits there, with developing other energy systems above just aerobic.
Now I used to shy away a lot from cross training or doing any strength training that involved sort of HIIT, because I initially confused high intensity with high impact. And as runners, you never want to really cross train with anything that's too high impact, because you're already jarring your body enough as a runner. But high intensity is a good thing as long as you're not mashing yourself.
Yeah, I think I have done a lot in the last couple of years, and high intensity interval training. So basically the idea is you're going 2 to 3 minutes, very, very high intensity. And you're getting a couple minutes of rest, usually about the same length. And it's like you cycle hard, you go all out for 2-3 minutes, and then you recover. And it's these little shorts of bouts of rest that helps. That has been also shown to really help with development of Vo2 Max. And you can do that without having to go out and necessarily put the impact of running hard on a track to build Vo2 Max. Again, Vo2 Max is just one of many, many things. Runner's economy is really more about being better at running and being more efficient with running, and
the actual physical motions that
controlling the effort, right? So the idea is there's classic examples out there. You have two runners who are pretty much equal in everything. They even have maybe the same age, let's say they had the same similar genetic backgrounds. They have the same Vo2 max, but one runner can go out there and run at a faster pace, And it's because they're just more efficient, right?
Yeah.
They have better biomechanics, they have better technique, they have maybe more training or years of training, right? Because the more you run and the longer you run, the more efficient your body gets. And so running economy is really about what you do with the oxygen, right? So VO2 is how much you can breathe in and your body can use. But if you're more efficient at using it, you can think of it like an engine. You're running a more efficient engine, right? That's running economy. And so that takes time to develop, right? It's so many things. And it's like that has been shown to actually have more impact than things like VO2 max, because you can have two runners that you can have a runner with a higher VO2 max, but have poor running economy, get beat by a runner who, so I always kind of go back to the VO2 max because it's crammed down our throats.
Yeah.
You know how many times I've had my VO2 max measured?
I'm going to go either 0 or 1.
Zero. You know how many times any of my athletes have? I've only had one that did it, but I didn't tell them to do it. And it's interesting. I'm not saying don't have it done, but if you're going to do it, at least do it in a lab where it's going to be accurate.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things, it's funny, Steve, because, there is so much noise made about VO2 max out there, in the YouTube running world and Runner's World magazine. I mean, you name it. It's one of those sexy things to talk about. But for the most part, my take on it is that, genetically you're born with a certain predisposition. And I think you can, sorry, I'm trying to keep my hand on screen here so people can see what I'm trying to say. I think you can shift it a little bit. It'll go up and down depending on how much work you put into sort of that threshold running, but not even threshold running, but, maxed out running. Yeah. But I think runners are better off spending their time in other places like lactate threshold training, like just putting in the miles. I mean, that's going to make you better faster than just worrying about your maximum oxygen intake. I mean, especially if you're like, if your goal is to be like a half marathoner or a marathoner or an ultra marathoner, VO2 max is not going to do that much for you because your entire race, all your training is going to be based around aerobic running.
Yeah. If you're a miler, VO2 max is everything, right? Yeah. So if you're running truly at your VO2 max, you have maybe 10 minutes that you can sustain that. And that's a mile pretty much for it. Obviously there's people who run miles in 5 minutes, 6 minutes and stuff like that. But that's what we're talking about. The difference between that and a 5K, right? When we run a 5K, now we're starting in 5K and above, then that lactate threshold becomes more important in our training. It's not that VO2 is not important. It absolutely is. It's just, it's not the everybody that I've seen, I don't say everybody, but a lot of people I see, they obsess over it. And it's like, it's just one piece of a much bigger pie. Yeah. And if I honestly think that if people really want to get faster, they do it this way. First of all, they're consistent. If you're not consistent, then it doesn't matter. Two, don't focus on one training cycle. Right? Don't focus. Like if you think about most marathon trainers, half marathon trainers, we go out, we get a plan, we download it, we run for our 15, 16 weeks, whatever it is, 20 weeks. And then we cycle back down and we take a few weeks off and good. We want to rest and we want to recover, but then we don't do anything for 6 months. We might do a couple 3-4 mile runs, here and there just to kind of stay healthy. And then we repeat the process. And so we never get this stair-stepping improvement. Yeah. Or if we do, it's because we're doing other things because we got smarter about nutrition and stuff like that. But if people really want to get faster, you really got to focus on that 90% of your time running slow, running easy, running low intensity, low heart rate, level 1, level 2, or zone 1, zone 2. And then after you've got to a point where you've built up volume, and again, volume is going to be relative to the race distance. Then we start working in those, we start hitting those upper, tempo runs and kind of more of those threshold runs, maybe doing a little bit of that track speed workouts or, if you're doing marathon, maybe doing 1 mile repeats or half mile repeats so that you do get that neuromuscular adaptation. You do have to make your feet move, right? Yep. And if you constantly run the same pace all the time, you're going to build muscles, supporting, stabilizing muscles that actually you got to fight against, right? Because you're just, your body is always used to running that same pace. And so oftentimes if somebody comes to me and they're like, hey, I'm stuck, I'm plateaued, I slow them down first. Right?
Okay.
It's usually because they're pushing their everyday runs up into that zone 3
Yeah.
area where they're starting to get a little bit of lactate accumulation. They're starting to if you notice that you're running and you're struggling with your breath, if it's supposed to be an easy day, you're running too fast.
Exactly.
It's okay to do that zone 3 kind of, what I would say 85% of your heart rate effort, somewhere in there, from time to time, right? But it's not like you shouldn't be doing it every day.
Exactly. If your easy days aren't easy enough, if you're always tired and you can't max out, you're running too hard too often.
Yeah, it's very common in runners to be running in that zone 3. It's a trap. It's not that it's a bad zone. It has its purpose, but it's not every day. And it's one of those ones where maybe one day a week, that's okay. Or twice a week if you're younger and can recover fast. Again, it depends on your balancing. You want to balance hard days with easy days versus just running. But I find a lot of I did this myself for years before I really learned how to run, because I never set out to be a coach. It was an accidental thing. But I was running and I felt like every single day my pace had to be faster. I was always watching my pace. I'd go out for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and I would run, and I'd run hard. I mean, I was still aerobic. I was just at the very upper end where, because to me, it was about, I'm running slower today. Today I only did, an 8.5 minute pace, and I'm usually doing an 8:15. And I would really push my body hard. And then after several weeks, I'd start getting little, this hurt and that hurt. And I think that happens with a lot of runners, and it's an easy trap, because you feel like you feel good. You feel like you're gaining your endurance, and you feel good, and you feel like you can cover the distance. So why not push your pace?
Right? Yeah. And that was me for the first 3 years of my running career. I've only been running, as an adult for 10 years now. And, I kind of spent the first 5 years of my running career doing everything wrong. And that was one of my first mistakes, was just kind of riding that line of how hard can I push myself every single time I go out there. And it was getting me nowhere. It bore out exactly the way you said it, Steve. I was just stuck, and I couldn't go faster if I wanted to.
It's counterintuitive, right? Because we think that in order to run faster, we need to run faster. And there is some truth to that, but it's not your day-to-day training, right? You do want to hit, as you get, after you get past that 1 year part, 1 year mark, I feel that's when people should start introducing speed training. Like some people say at 6 months, you're okay. And you're probably okay, but you want that 1 year, because that's when your muscles have adapted, your bones. It takes like a year to 2 for just your bone, skeletal structure to handle the impacts of running. I mean, you can do short distances, but remember, every time you take a step, that's just one more impact of ground force and your body having to hold that. So, after a year, most runners are going to be okay, as long as they consistently and systematically, increase in their volume at that point. But, when somebody's getting in there and, they can run maybe, again, I'm going to use the typical half marathon 10K runner, and you can judge up for that. Generally, once you're getting into that, where you can run 25, 35 miles per week, you're probably at a good point where you've got a decent base where you can then now start, introducing speed work. And now let's look at a normal half marathon plan. So normal half marathon plan takes you up to 10, 12 miles. You might not be hitting that 30 miles until you're in your peak weeks.
Yeah.
Half marathon plan, right? So what I'm telling, for most people who are in that maybe 0 to 3 year range, is that work on your volume, because your volume will speed you up more than doing the typical download off the internet plan where you do, okay, I'm going to do a long run, and then I'm going to do a tempo run on Wednesday, and then I'm going to do this, whatever. Focus on that volume first. Now, the downside of this is if you're a runner going out just to complete the half marathon or a 10K, and you're just doing it for fun, and those are perfectly valid reasons, and you don't really care about, you're not super into the speed thing, then you don't need to increase your volume. You can run comfortably and do all that. So what I'm really kind of referring to is those runners who are really obsessed about getting fast in their half marathon.
Yep.
In 10Ks is try adding volume. There is some push out there. It's like, oh, run less, get faster kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's more for more advanced runners though.
It's advanced runners, and they're also doing some back-to-back runs that, they're countering for it in other ways. And it's a really catchy book title. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but it's not your typical, runner in those first couple years is really focus on building that aerobic development. When you're running a half marathon, 97 or something, 95% of your energy is coming from your aerobic energy system.
Exactly.
So you're going to spend 1 day a week training that 3 or 4% or 5%, or you could spend that 1 day a week really focusing on that other 97 or 95%. You might be, that might be an area you want to focus on. But speed training and speed work, there is a place for it. And it's usually in the last 6 to 8 weeks of a training cycle before a race, because then you can kind of sharpen or tape, kind of dial in a little bit, get you used to that faster pace. And you can increase that side of the speed equation fairly quick, whereas aerobic development can take years.
Gotcha. Now, before we get into, I want to take us into a discussion of those people who are ready for that next step. But before we do that, I think it's probably a good idea, because we haven't really addressed it yet. Sorry for my dog here. To talk a little bit about something which has strangely become a little bit of a controversial topic here, and I hope it doesn't tonight. But cadence and good running form, in terms of how they affect your efficiency as a runner. What kind of goals do you like to give to your new runners as far as cadence, which is just the sheer number of steps that you take per minute when you're running? Do you give them a goal, or even like a fuzzy goal that they should be shooting for before you even worry about them pushing their speed?
Yeah. So a couple things with cadence is that, we always hear the magic 180 number. The 180 number actually originated from somebody, I believe they were watching the Olympics or something, and one of the announcers counted a particular runner's step, and that's where 180 came from. Now, that doesn't mean 180 is wrong, but it also doesn't mean that 170 is wrong either, or even 165 or 190. There's a range where it starts becoming, it's normalized for a particular runner based off their gait, stride length, and other stuff. I had a guest on RunBuzz podcast, Brody Sharp, and I
love Brody. He's been on my channel. Yeah.
Couple episodes back, I had him on, and we had this very discussion. And he said something that I kind of always thought, but he put it in a way that I go, oh, he's like, if a runner's not having problems with injuries, we were talking it more from an injury prevention perspective, yeah. But he's like, if a runner's not having injuries, don't change it. Like, don't intentionally change it. But if you are having some issues, if you're having maybe some Achilles issues or plantar fasciitis or something like that, then you do count your cadence and it's particularly low, like maybe in the 150s, then maybe try increasing it by maybe 5%. And then a couple weeks later, another 5% or whatever, until you can kind of work yourself out. And you might be surprised that change is enough to change the dynamics of your running gait enough that you become less injury prone. But from a coaching perspective, I will say that I come from the point of is that I am not a physical therapist and I'm not an exercise physiologist. And so I have to stay within the realm. And I think too many running coaches, we obsess on form or we concentrate on form. Mm-hmm. I'm more of the like, hey, run with your shoulders loose, right? Run with your hands loose. Don't tense up, because if you tense up, you're wasting energy. It's more about energy. To me, it's more about energy racing. You're running with more posture, right? If you're running with poor posture, you're going to have, especially on the longer distances, you're going to start getting fatigue in your lower back, and you're going to start slouching, and then it just spirals down from
Everything
there.
falls out of control. Yeah.
That's the stuff that I feel most people need to fix first. And then things like cadence, and again, I would never change a foot strike on a runner who doesn't have issues, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Why try to fix something that isn't broke?
Especially in the middle of a training cycle or something like that, where people are just kind of moving along.
Yeah, but if I was coaching the U.S. Olympic team, and little things like that might be enough to make a difference. I think as runners, we put our focus a little bit sometimes on areas that probably don't give us the biggest impact. And not that they're not important, and they all have their place, and it's very runner independent. There's no right or wrong thing. And this goes with all training. It has nothing, we're talking about a lot of generalities, but I can also say there's other runners who can tolerate different things better. And so my big thing is, from a coaching perspective, is I have to know my runner, and I have to know where they're at, and how we're going to, where do they want to go? How hard are they willing to train? Because if they truly want to go, let's say sub-3 in a marathon, they're going to have, unless they are naturally gifted super quick and have great genetics, they're going to have to work really hard. I mean, this is something that you've been pursuing. So it's just, you have to cater it to the running. And so if you're the new runner starting, or you're a runner that's only 5 years in, or you're recreational and you don't have time to put in 70, 80 hours a week, well, there's trade-offs. So you just,
exactly.
We all have a little bit of time each day to do what we love. And so we just have to figure out what's the best thing today that's going to get me the biggest return. That's the way I look at it.
Exactly. And just to kind of put the whole cadence matter to bed, at least for this conversation, just to talk in generalities again, that 180 magic number is kind of like, if you're close to that, the idea is that, if your cadence is too slow, coaches tend to get scared that maybe you're overstriding, maybe you're, putting yourself at risk for injury a little bit too much. So the idea is, with the increase of your cadence, maybe you're shortening up your stride, hopefully landing under your center of mass, and putting yourself less at risk for injury.
The number one tool I have as a coach when I look at a runner is my phone. Because what I do is I videotape them from the side, and then I run them through a program called Technique. I think they just got bought out and changed the name, but I can slow their running down, and you can literally put them in slow motion, and I look for that braking impact. And that braking impact is when the foot goes out in front of the knee, and their foot comes down, and it creates a shock wave all up the leg and into the body. And plus it's slowing them down because they're fighting that constant resistance. It's
exactly.
So that's the number one thing, is like, I do look for that on every single, and I do it at different paces, because I've noticed that some runners, when they're running their easy pace, they don't do it. But if they go out and they run their tempo pace, they're braking. Because our tendency as runners, when we're running and we're trying to increase our stride length as well, and we're pushing ourselves, and as a result of pushing it, we're often pushing our foot out, and that's causing some potential for injury, which is why speed training has a higher risk for injury than some of those easier effort runs.
Absolutely. Yeah, I tend to tell people, drive with the knee. I use that phrase a lot to try to reinforce that when you're moving quickly, try to get your knee out in front, lead with your knee, so that you're not sort of like shoving your feet way out in front of you, and possibly, mashing your heels and just sending those shockwaves up your leg.
I think when I first started coaching, I really spent a lot of time on form, because it's what we've been told and taught. And then the more I started talking to physical therapists and people, and going, there's not really perfect running form, right? Every individual has a perfect running form. And so that's the big thing is if you're having injury issues, it's probably worth your time to have a physical therapist look at it and just do a running analysis and say, is there a problem here? Is my injury potential for this problem? Now, am I breaking? Am I, but If there's not, keep running.
Yeah, exactly.
And don't let somebody change your form. Like, I don't feel comfortable as a coach going in and changing somebody's running form. I just don't. There's too many things that I'm not qualified to do. But a physical therapist, they're qualified to do it. But I look for generalities, right? I do look at things like if their cadence is super low and they're having problems, well, we'll try increasing their cadence because they're not injured at that point, right? That's it looks like we have
yeah, Andrew, thank you for joining us tonight. He's another amazing runner with a YouTube channel that I know better every day. We go back and forth, but thank you for being here. And just as just to break in here, everybody, before we get into talking a little bit more about sort of the more advanced runner who's trying to get faster, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. And anybody who's watching after the fact, please drop some comments in the comment section below, and Steve and I will be more than happy to get back to you after this is all over and done with. And there's Andrew. You're welcome. Thank you for being here again. So before we get into like physical things that we can do, Steve, to continue along the journey of becoming a faster runner after that sort of first year of building your cardiovascular system, etc. One thing that you touched on that I kind of want to reiterate for everybody, just to make sure that they got the point earlier on from you, is to start thinking of your running career more in terms of multiple training cycles. Get the consistency down, of course. That's going to just make you a better runner as the years go by, no matter what. But as you start to introduce speed, do it on a regular basis. Race fairly regularly if your intention is to get faster in the long run. But if you start thinking of your running career in terms of training cycle, 12 to 20 weeks, a little bit of downtime so that your body can get healthy and get back to where it needs to be before you jump into the next training cycle. But as each training cycle goes by, you will start to notice small percentages of performance improvement. It doesn't ever really go, boom, suddenly I'm fast. It's these tiny little incremental changes that over years, I'm still experiencing at 52 years old. I'm still experiencing getting faster. I would never have thought that was possible. But it's all because I'm just kind of pushing safely year after year, cycle after cycle.
Yeah. And I think that's where you get the benefits for the more experienced runners, is that the longer somebody runs, they're kind of doing that implicitly. It's built in, right? The longer you run, in Lydiard, I'm sure you know who Arthur Lydiard is. He's kind of all modern training plans, regardless of whose name's on it, comes from a lot of his background, but he calls that stacking the pyramids. So the idea, there's the training pyramid where you focus on endurance, and there's the different phases, strength, and then and basically the idea is if you think of like a teeter-totter, it's the only thing I can think of that has an angle, right? And you got the first pyramid, and then you come out of that training cycle, and the next pyramid, you don't go clear. You're not starting at the end of the last one. You do drop back.
Yep.
And your training cycles could be even shorter or longer depending on your race scheduling, because you want to, the whole idea behind that training is to lead up to some event like in a race. But when you come off of a training cycle, there is a certain period of carryover time where you still get all the benefits. Just because you're cutting back doesn't mean you lose your fitness. And so you do want that time to allow your body to recover and everything to kind of heal up. And then because you get a little bit of that carryover, then when you go into the next training cycle, you get the benefit of coming in a little bit stronger, a little bit faster, a lot more aerobically conditioned. And if you kind of think of like taking those little cycles and making them into longer cycles, then you can do it. But I think a lot of us, myself included, at least where I live, it gets miserable in the wintertime. Yeah. And I do like running in the cold, but I will say that as I gotten older, I'm becoming more of a wimp. And so what happens is a lot of times we have a spring and a summer. It's in North America. We typically have a spring and summer race season. And we spend all summer and we train for those fall races. And then November, after our race is over, we take December off, which is good. We need the mental break. And then it's like, it's cold weather and it's like, well, I'll kind of run inside on some treadmills or maybe go run some runs. And then we spend 4 months, at least in the northern climates, deconditioning. And then spring comes, the weather gets nice and we're ready to go again. But the problem is we're repeating the cycle over again.
Yeah.
And then we get good and then we come off and we might get a little bit of boost through the summer because you're coming out of the spring and then go through the summer and then in the fall. But then we take typically those 3-4 months where it's a lot less volume. So from what I've seen works best with the more experienced runners is having more of a longer term plan and using race training or race cycles or, the little mesocycles that we talk about that break our training up into small pieces, but stack them, come out of one with kind of like, what's the next goal and adjust your training accordingly. And that's something where if somebody hasn't done that before, you might want to work with somebody to help you lay that out, like a 2-3 year plan. That doesn't mean you have to work with them every day or every week, but have somebody kind of help lay that out for you and set up your training for the next couple of years. And then the second thing is with more experienced runners is we have all these different levers we can play with. I like to think of, you ever see like a musical, well, you got all these guitars in the background, so you know what a board is, right? They got all the little levers for the different channels on a sound system, right?
Yep.
You think of, if anybody's ever seen kind of a soundboard with all the different channels and sliders, we can kind of think of our training like that. We have lots of things we can tweak and play with. We can increase the intensity on a particular workout, or we can scale back intensity. We can do things like maybe increase the volume, the training volume, which we've been talking about a lot. Some people respond very well to that. Some people don't. With me, what I found is when I got into that 14, 15, 16 mile long runs, I kept hitting a wall, and I'd start having issues with even my own running, starting to have might start to have a little bit of Achilles pain or plantar fasciitis. And so part of it's because it might have been that I was pushing training too hard, because I tend to push myself probably more than I should myself, because I think I can outsmart myself. So I really need a running coach to keep me doing stupid stuff. And so I have found that certain runners, they're good to a certain point, and then their body starts to break down. And a lot of that has biomechanics, it has technique, it could be training. There's a lot of things that cause these problems. But until you really know yourself, or the runner you're coaching, and that takes a while, and
absolutely
what the boundaries are. But yeah, I think that a lot of it comes down to distance you're training at. With 5K, I tend to do much harder. Definitely the lactate threshold runs, but also, I push some a little bit of Vo2 Max runs in there as well. And again, a lot of that is to really in a lot of ways is to really get the runner used to just feeling uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I've noticed this with the high school kids. Tremendous, at least in the area I have, I'm fortunate to have some really, really fast kids, and some of them want it and have the talent to do it. And other ones, they have the talent to do it, but they don't like to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right. They don't like that feeling, because when you're running hard, like especially on a 400 meter, like for some of the track athletes, when you're running 400 meters, I mean,
it hurts.
You want to die. Like it's
awesome. It
It
wasn't 48 hours ago. I
find it is the worst race. 400 meters to me is the worst race, because 800 meters, you can kind of get a little more.
You can back off just enough to make it tolerable.
Yeah. But when somebody comes to me with a 400 meters runner, and I'm like, you know what you're getting into, right? Because 200 meters is hard too, but 200 meters, like you can see the end. Like it's like I can look it up for a little bit longer, but yeah.
It's funny. Before we get too deep into sort of like that shorter stuff, Steve, I just kind of want to give some people a little bit of a perspective here. I spent the first 5-6 years of my running career. Once I discovered that I loved the marathon, the only lever that I was aware of as far as trying to get better, trying to get faster, was the distance, the volume lever. I was convinced simply because I at the time I wasn't researching, I wasn't reading the books, I wasn't, I hadn't even crossed my mind that I would ever be a run coach. And I thought the only way that I was going to get faster, better in every way was increasing volume with each training cycle. So I started out thinking I was, hot stuff, doing 40 miles a week, went out, ran my first marathon, and I was like, okay, let's see what happens if I increase by 10 miles per week next time. And I kept this game up for 3 years, maybe 4 years, where I made it all the way up to peaking in a training cycle at 120 miles a week. And that was when I was 47 years old.
Wow.
And that training cycle proved one thing to me. There's a law of diminishing returns. I learned this through experience. So and just for everybody out there who thinks that might be a good idea for them to try to, don't go there. I performed worse. It was one of my worst races ever when I raced after that 120 mile a week training cycle. It was only after the fact, after talking to other experienced and very fast runners, that I realized that other levers were available. So rather than me describe what are those other levers are, Steve, I'm going to hand it back to you to kind of go there.
Yeah. So I think that regardless of the runner, I mean, the fastest runners in the world, like I'm going to go back to this, the fastest runners in the world spend 90% of their time, maybe 80 if they're aggressive, running easy runs.
Yeah.
Right? So because something's called a speed workout does not necessarily that translates directly to speed. The second thing is now we have that 10% lever to play with, right? Now we can start playing with different types of workouts. So again, I would kind of work at it this way. I would start off with getting the 80%, 90% of the runs in. I might add some hill workouts to start building and focusing on strength. I would probably start throwing in some tempo runs. So basically slightly elevated pushed pace runs somewhere in that 30 to 45 minutes range at about a pace that you could sustain for about an hour. But you don't need to go a full hour. I think that's a mistake people make too.
Oh yeah, especially you don't want to do that right out of the gate.
Unless you're that half marathon kind of distance where you want a little bit more time. But that's where I would kind of start. And then now you're touching kind of like the purpose of the hill work is really to build strength in your legs. And that was prior to strength training becoming all the craze. That was how coaches back in the 60s and 70s, and the Lydiard made it famous for that was his. He would never do strength training today. He would use hills to do strength training. And by the way, hills didn't necessarily mean hill repeats. He was also doing bounding, like almost like a skip,
plyometrics, almost
plyometric bounding up a hill. I mean, it was pretty. It's a little more popular in other countries than it is here in the U.S. But anyways, those would be kind of the core things I would start with up until you get to the intermediate level. Then I'd start, after, if you've had a year or two experience, then I might start going a little bit more anaerobic at times and start focusing on those neuromuscular, you got to get your muscles firing. And now you can start working the distance of the intervals, probably start short intervals, start getting longer intervals. If I was training for a marathon, I'd probably do more of the, maybe not the full blown fast as you can, but more of the, 800 meter to mile repeats where you're pushing pace, but you're not going all out either. So maybe your marathon pace, maybe your 1 mile pace, depending on the length of the interval. And I try to keep people when I get into intervals specifically. So what I mean by intervals, I'm usually talking about running around a track or a measured distance, anywhere from 200 meters up to, I've done them as high as 2 miles, but then that's kind of crazy.
I do one in my track
1 mile
every week.
I've gone as high as those, and those are fun.
Now, Steve, just for the sake of clarity, to make sure that everybody who watches this after the fact kind of is clear, let's talk about what anaerobic is, sort of where you find that, and just so that people know when they head to the track and they're starting to get familiar with these different repetition distances. What do you mean by anaerobic pace?
So I could go really deep into this, but really basically it is when you're aerobic, it means presence of oxygen. right? And so oxygen is delivered through our heart pumping, through our lungs, through our blood, to our muscles, and ultimately into our cells. And it's part of the process of converting, into energy. Long story short, right? We can continue. In other words, when we're running aerobically, our body can continue to function and maintain, what we're doing, because we can get energy from, whether that's the carbohydrates that we've been eating in terms of the glucose and the sugars and the glycogen that's in our liver, but we can also get it from fats, right? And so we can think of our cells as like literally these little energy factories. When we have oxygen, everything's firing along great. Our body does have the capability to perform in bursts of anaerobic energy. Okay? So this means lack of oxygen. It means you're putting a fourth of effort that's much higher than we can keep up by delivering oxygen. And some things happen. There's some chemical processes down behind the scenes that basically release and start slowing us down. That's why we can't sustain. That's why we get tired, we get out of breath, because we're short. Now, when we run, we're not 100% one or the other, right? We're not 100% aerobic. We're not 100% anaerobic. However, if we look at like 100-meter sprint, it's almost 100% anaerobic, because it happens. It's over with so quick. It's the oh crap, a bear just jumped out on the running trail. I got to get out of there, right?
Yeah.
But as our distance starts getting bigger, as we start going to 200 meters and 400 meters, what we see is the anaerobic energy starting to go down because we can't sustain it, and the aerobic going up. And by the time we get over 400 or 800 meters, we're now starting to cross the 50-50 line of mix, right? And then when we get into 5K, it's like 90% aerobic. Even if you're running 5K as hard as you can, which for me, 5Ks racing, I did not enjoy.
Yeah, no, it's hard.
It's the 400
takes
meters.
It out of you. Exactly. It's the same feeling of swallowing your heart.
Yeah, I do love 5Ks, but it's more for just going and doing them for fun. And again, I'm past my days of where I feel like performance is not my reason for motivation for running. But however, now you start getting into the 5K and beyond. Now you're primarily aerobic. And so there is things that, in terms of making your legs move faster, making sure that you can make good use. So when you start to go anaerobic, when you cross a certain point, which is our lactate threshold, there's a number of other terms you'll sometimes hear called, but basically when you reach a point, you start giving off a byproduct called lactate. Okay, that's not lactic acid, but it's lactate. Lactate can be reconsumed by the body as energy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because your body, when you're running and you're performing, not just running, but any sports where you're performing, your body's looking at what is the quickest thing I can get a hold of. It's either carbohydrates in the forms of glycogen and glucose, because they're very quick, fast action in the presence of oxygen. Or, I can reabsorb I can start, doing, without getting into the chemical thing, I can start breaking down fatty acids and basically burning fat. I can even absorb that lactate. And so the problem is that as we start getting into those higher intensities, when we start going into zones 4 and 5, where we're talking about your very, very hard effort, eventually the point is there's this thing called the lactate turning point. And the idea is you get to the point where it's being created faster than you can do anything with it. And by that point, you're pretty much full on, or very near full on anaerobic, and you're just going to start having, you're just going to slow down. Your body's going to force this in order to conserve.
There's nothing you can do about it. It has nothing to do with willpower. It's just going to happen.
Yeah. So the idea is with lactate threshold, and why you mentioned you're a big proponent of lactate threshold training is if you can get, let's say your lactate threshold kicks in, let's say at about a 7-minute mile per pace. I'm just making up a pace just for the sake of demonstration. You're at that 7-minute mile pace, and that's the point where you start accumulating lactate, just a little bit at first. And you can certainly keep pushing past that point, and the lactate will continue to build. And you can eventually, you can do it for short periods of time, even up to an hour or two. You can be running and accumulating lactate because you're using most of it up. But now you go from it. Now all of a sudden you're at that. Maybe you're racing somebody, and you go from that. What did I say? 7-minute pace, whatever number I was using. Now you go 7, and all of a sudden you want to kick it in, and all of a sudden you're up to a 6-minute pace. right? Now, if we've ever been in that scenario where we're in like a little short competition with somebody and they took off running, we had to run hard, that lasts for a very, very short period of time, right? And generally you go up, and if you keep increasing the intensity, you start hitting what we call our Vo2 Max, and that's a pace that you can do for maybe 5-10 minutes.
Yeah.
Right?
And pure total pain the whole time.
So the reason why that's important, that 5 to 10 minutes, is we can also do interval training where we're not doing a solid 10 minutes of running, but what we're doing is we're saying, if it takes you 2 minutes to get around the track or 90 seconds to get around the track, and we do that 6 or 8 times, we can accumulate equivalent of what 10 minutes might be.
Mm-hmm.
And so where we found is that, or I didn't find, but the experts, coaches that I've learned from and watched and the research I've done is saying somewhere between that 10 and 18 minutes, if you can have 10 to 18 minutes, no matter how you break them down, whether it's a bunch of little 200s, a bunch of 400s, 800s, ladders, whatever you want to do, you want to be in that 12 to 16 minute. As soon as you start hitting that 18 minutes of you're doing too many intervals.
Yeah.
And you're 90 seconds, 90 seconds. Once you start getting in that 18, then's when the return on investment starts dropping, right? The law of diminishing terms, So that's what you're trying to do on the track. But also when you are practicing those runs, when you are doing those intervals, your technique has to get better. Your foot strike, your ground contact time gets faster because you're having to get down, get off that ground really quick. And
exactly.
And if anybody's ever watched track athletes warm up, they're doing a lot of the skips, right? And some of the skips, and there's certain skips where they are practicing that. It's almost like
just getting off the ground, exactly, as fast as they can.
Getting off the ground. And so there's a lot of these things, all these things, plus years of training, plus, working with your mileage, plus, good strength training, good core strength training, good reactive strength training that you can get through things like plyometrics and other stuff. These are all things. It's a combination of all these things. It's not one thing. Mm-hmm. It's a combination of all things. And your genetics and your goals and your different things certainly play into that. And for the average runner, this is way too much to even think about.
Yeah. And that's why, you make a good point, Steve. It's just too much to and that's where a good coach comes in. But even with a good coach, the point I want to make to everybody who's going to watch this is that, even if you had the mind that could take all this in and understand it all instantaneously, it's not physically possible to take advantage of all this at once. This is a multi-year process of being able to reach the point where you can push yourself for miles on a track to be able to reap the benefits of those kind of heavy workouts. And
Isaac, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going to make a comment that.
No, please do. Please do.
I was going to say Dr. Andrews making a comment.
Let's see here.
Plyometrics. But what I really like about, he's talking about the single leg. It's a single leg sport, and a lot of the strength training, doing a lot of single leg drills, single leg types of hops and jumps and things like that, I think are definitely a big part of the types of strength training that we prescribe as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because plyometrics is something I only discovered really started playing with like 6 months ago, just because I felt like I was maxing out my time in the gym with the weights, and I felt like I was just kind of like doing everything I could, and then I heard about plyometrics, and it's like, wow, this sounds like exactly what might come in handy at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit it's I don't do them. I don't do them enough. I try to do them every now and then, but it's like, to me, just getting in my runs and just getting in some basic strength training, or going to, I had to cut back on the HIIT workouts because I managed to separate my abdominal. I got diastasis recti now. And I got this big bulge now because I got a little too aggressive with the high intensity training. and I went into it a little too hardcore. I've been doing it for 3 years, and then I kind of stepped aside. Well, when COVID hit, everything shut down, and I went away for about 6 months. And then my knucklehead walks in. I walk in like a total knucklehead and try to take off like I haven't been off for 6 months.
Yeah, gotcha.
And I just overdid it, and it was just like so. I had to really scale back on that. So now I'm back to doing some little more reasonable exercises and stuff. And,
gotcha. And that's a perfect jumping off point.
I'm also seeing a physical therapist. So,
wow. Okay. Well, I'm glad of that. At least you're seeking the professional help. But I think your point there is actually a good point for all runners to keep in mind. If you haven't been consistent, if there's been a break in your training, don't expect that you are going to return at the level at which you left. You have to give yourself a little grace and kind of build back. Or if you've been overtraining for that matter, if you've just been hitting it too hard for too long. I'm learning that the hard way at this present moment too. So, Steve,
I just want to say one thing, and then
absolutely.
It's very easy for us as runners to accidentally cross the line of injury, right? It's very easy for us to push a little too hard one day because we might be under stress at work, and it feels good to just lay into a run. It's okay to have that happen sometimes. Just be aware that if I do lay in heavy, or if I do run, maybe I go out and I do find myself into zone 3 run when I really meant to go out and be an easy run. Don't beat yourself up for it. Just know now that you need to take the next day and recover. And it's more, the recovery day is where all the progress is made. And I just feel like I have to preach that over and over.
I'm so glad you said that.
Because the recovery is where we actually get the growth. That's where it occurs. It occurs the minute we stop running. It's important we do cool downs because we're now facilitating recovery. We always skip. I was horrible. I still am horrible sometimes, but I've gotten better at it. The warm-ups. I spend, let me last one little thing about the warm-ups because I'm on my high horse here. So I have a co-coach who is an All-American track athlete at a smaller school, but she made the All-American team, and she came out to coach, and she's not with me anymore, but she came out to coach one day, and she was watching me go through the warm-ups, and I said, "Hey, do you want to run through the warm-ups?" And she's like 25 minutes into this warm-up. I'm like, "Sarah,
wow.
They're only with me an hour. Like, I got to get some." She's like, "You're not warming them up enough." Because I was doing like the 5 minute, because I was kind of rushing it. You just get kind of in the, and she's like, "You're not warming them up enough." And then we noticed that after warming them up for like 20 minutes, which just seems a lot, they were performing so much better.
Amazing.
And then when we got done, she's like, "Now we're cooling them down." And I'm like, "Okay." Like, we're just going to do a little bit of stretching or a little bit of more walking and stuff. And she cooled them down for like 15, 20 minutes. She's also an exercise physiologist on top of it. But it was amazing. Like, we kept seeing this, and she's like, "Yeah, we have to start with a good cool down process because that's going to kick off the recovery, and then, and of course go from there." But
yeah, I would like to really talk about how important that is because, when I go out, personal experience, when I go out for my hardest workouts, like on the track, that's the hardest workout of my week. If it wasn't for that sort of 3 mile progressive ramp up, things would be horrible. I'd be, popping all kinds of ligaments and tendons out there as an old guy. And then the same thing at the end of it all, it's this 3 mile, warm down. And then the only other thing I want to throw in here is, like, especially after those harder workouts, get in the door and within 15, 20 minutes, get a nice mix of carbohydrates and proteins into your system when it's most receptive to taking them in and assisting in that recovery as fast as possible.
Yeah, I agree.
Very cool. Steve, I hate to do this, but I'm looking here at the clock as it ticks by, and we are at 1 hour and 9 minutes here. Obviously, this is a huge topic, and it's a topic that a lot of people want to know more about. So before I begin the sign-off for the evening, I do want to invite you back for a second round, even on the same exact subject matter, though I'm perfectly happy to stray into other things that are important to runners. But the door is always open on my channel to you because as I said, not only have you been an inspiration to me from the very beginning of my adult running career, but you are such a font of truly solid knowledge. And I mean, I look to you as sort of like what I want to be in 10 years, as far as, my abilities and the depth of my knowledge as a coach, when I've had more time and experience. I just can't say enough about how much you and your podcast have done for me. So anything I can do to attempt to return the favor.
Yeah, you're making me blush here. I definitely appreciate that. It's, I'm still learning, and it's been 12 years, 11 years since I started. And, I think every runner has to be a student of the sport. And don't just listen to one coach. Don't just listen to Paul. Don't listen to Steve. Don't listen to other coaches. Like, learn from all the coaches. There's amazing coaches out there. Look at what they all have in similar. Try to avoid falling into fads. I've changed a lot in the last couple of years. I've fallen into some of them myself. Like even as a coach, and now, look at evidence. Look at evidence-based. Look at the studies. I know they're hard to read. Look for studies that are peer reviews. Do your own research. I think there's a lot of inconsistencies in research, and I think you have to discern. Because it's always like, well, this says eggs are bad. This says eggs are great. What is it? Fine, right? It's the same thing in running. Like, a lot of the studies in running, they're targeted after college kids, because college runners, because who are they going to get? Most of these are done in universities. Who are you going to get? You're going to get a busy adult like, Paul, who's running a bazillion miles a week. You're going to get him to go in and take research. No, they're getting college kids, and they're not the population. I mean, I'm aging now. I'm 52, just like we're Paul and I are now the same age. I didn't realize that. Our running style and how we approach running is going to be different than somebody maybe in their 20s and 30s and stuff.
Exactly.
But just because you're getting older, I mean, Paul's killing it on your speed, right? But you've worked hard, and that's the key. You were a student of the sport. It wasn't because you were a coach, right?
Exactly. I'm a coach because I just love the sport, period.
The reality of what makes coaches great is not necessarily the head knowledge. It's the working with people. And it's trying to reach each runner where they're at. And so you can help them. But anyways, I appreciate all the kind words. I'll come back anytime you want to talk. I'm always talking running.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I appreciate it.
If they have specific questions. There's actually a great question that I don't know if you want to answer that real quick or not.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's go after this.
Do you want me to answer it? I'll answer it.
Please do.
All right. So some of my friends are all about maffetone, and slow base building. But wouldn't it be more effective to perform 80-20 all year? Depends. The thing about, so I have trained at least one athlete on MAF. I've tried it myself. If you have a lot of time and patience, and you're willing to take 6 months, 9 months, a year, 2 years to start seeing really massive improvement, it's a great way to go. It's not that it's about MAF slowing you down and forcing you down into that lower zone 1, zone 2, and building that aerobic thing. So at the beginning of this session, we were talking a lot about volume and training volume and building your aerobic capacity, because if you don't have that, it doesn't matter how fast you get. 80-20 is great as well. The thing with the 20 is I like to see more 90-10, to be honest. I think 80-20 is more for very experienced runners. And if you're a very experienced runner, 80-20 is fine. I find that most people can't sustain 80-20. They start to have some sort of breakdown with the amount of 20% of hard effort is a lot. Now, if you're sleeping 11, 12 hours a night, your nutrition's great. You're truly alternating your easy and hard days, and you're balancing and going into each day going, is today the day I do the 20, or do I need another day of slow? If you're doing that, then 80-20 works out very well. But 80-20, a lot of my training plans originally are based on 80-20, or they're more 90-10 now. But I'm not even doing 10 for the first year with somebody.
That's great. That's great.
All,
And that makes me feel better about the way things are going for me because,
yeah.
I feel like
I,
when I try to achieve that 20, it's
learned it
fun.
the hard way. I mean, it took coaching a lot of runners. I mean, I've probably coached close to 600-700 runners over my years. A lot of them got hurt. I mean, a lot of them got hurt. And then my attitude towards I was getting hurt, and I decided to back off. And when I slowed down and really focused on low intensity, higher volume, my injuries went away. Now it could also be because I was starting strength training around the same time too. So there's
Oh, there you go. Okay.
So it's not a complete thing, but I don't think there's a right for, I think each person has to kind of decide and try it and figure out what works best for them.
Exactly. It depends how many balls you have in the air too. Like you said, Steve.
Yeah. All training plans work to various levels.
Yeah. It all depends on how you want to balance your effort. Like if you're putting a lot into strength training or cross training, then 80-20 is asking a lot of your body on top of all that. So
a lot of high school kids are pushed really hard in competitive schools to perform at cross country and track. By the time they get to college, the college coaches don't want them because they've been just, they've pushed too hard. College coaches want that right upper, kind of not quite the fastest kid on the team, but maybe right down because they have room to develop. I think the same thing can be true with athletes as adults. Is we have to, again, I love math. The math tone method, I think out of the heart rate training is the one I tend to gravitate more, but you might have to spend 3 weeks walking and 3 months walk running. And most of us just don't have that patience.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I'm 52 years old, but I got a 14-year-old brain. And it's like, I feel like I I can do what I do in high school. And as the last couple of years have kind of wake me up. And when I get injured, getting out of bed in the morning, I go, I need to be careful.
Exactly. And I think you've just brought this full circle perfectly, sir.
Great question, though. Great question.
Yeah, it really is. And so yeah, I think burps. I think the thing you want to take away, one of the many things you want to take away from that is just think about the balance. What are the other things that are important to you as far as the way you want to become a better runner? Are you doing a lot of cross training? Are you doing a lot of strength training? Do you have the patience for math? If you want to see, if you want to be able to get out there and do some threshold runs every once in a while, and not wait for the maffetone method to kind of bring your speed up at that lower heart rate, then you may want to play with 80-20 or 90-10.
Well, I mean, you can throw in a run every now and then, even with math, if you want to. Nothing says you have to do it. It's not a contract. Training plans are a guide. They're never contracts. And then the last thing I'd say is, when you go from something like math, which is really, really slow base building, low heart rate training, and you jump into something like 80-20, 80-20 has a slightly elevated risk because of the 20, right? And it doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. And so it's a lot of training is just balancing risk. You can be very aggressive and see great results in 6 months, or you could be, another time you try it, you could be very aggressive and end up hurt. You have a higher risk of that. And so a lot of it is risk balance. A lot of it is how much time do you have before your goal event. These are all things that you have to kind of keep in mind. And I think the problem is we have so many different options that I get paralyzed sometimes. Like, I don't know what should I do now? Should I go try this or I try this? I try a lot just because I want to know what it's like to go through the process myself.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so I mean, it's a great question. Appreciate the.
Yeah, and I think the older you are, or not necessarily, chronological age, but more importantly than your age, I guess, how mature you are, how willing you are to listen to what your body is telling you, and not push on anyway. I think 80-20 is much more suited to people who are not necessarily that super A type personality, who are going to push ahead anyway. Like I used to be like, my body, I'll teach my body a lesson. I'm going to push through anyway. That hard workout's going to get done because it says so on paper. And then you end up injured. Yeah. But, the older I get, the more I realize, no, I'm feeling pretty terrible. that hard workout can wait for tomorrow. You know?
That's why I put masking tape over the top of watches all the time, because I want athletes to learn to take their own signals they're getting from their body. And then you can look at the stats at the end. Don't run, run based off the intensity and based off the adaptation you're trying to meet. Every workout has a purpose. Don't run to an arbitrary number on a watch.
Sir, that's a perfect way to close this. I'm going to take the opportunity to close this. I can't thank Steve enough. He's incredible. Steve, before we sign off, I want to give you another opportunity to talk about what's going on with you and your training and with the RunBuzz podcast, and where, again, can people find you on social media? Because after watching this, everybody's going to want to check out.
If somebody happens to be watching and then they're Columbus, Ohio, Central Ohio area, runforperformance.com is my local coaching sports performance. We focus on sports performance. This is what we focus on. If you're more of a general runner, or if you don't live in Central Ohio, runbuzz.com. It's always a work in progress. I'm constantly designing and tweaking things, but there's a lot of content out there, especially I've been doing a lot of stuff with nutrition lately. There's also some old stuff that probably needs to be edited and done just because it's been ignored. But I do have a Facebook group. It's got like 2,400 people in it. Not all of them are active, but 2,400 people. Just search for RunBuzz on Facebook. Like the page, but join the group. The group's where it's at. I'm also on Instagram at RunBuzz. So pretty easy to find if you search. There's not many Steve Carmichaels out there that are running coaches either. So
good,
awesome.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Google knows everything about us.
Yeah, gotcha. Exactly. So everybody, get over to everything Steve just said. You will not regret it. It's just incredible knowledge, incredible depth of knowledge, and he's a great guy, obviously. With that, sir, thank you again for being here. We will pick up the ball and run with it again on a future live stream. So thank you for your willingness to participate.
Thanks for everybody. I appreciate everybody that took the time out of their night to come talk to us.
Cool. And awesome. For everybody who's watching this after the fact, I encourage you, please leave a comment or drop a question below, and Steve and I will get back to you at some point in the very near future. And with that, thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a great night. I will see you in a couple of days. Bye-bye.